I have a lot for you too. And that a lot is my dear friend, Emily, who I got to meet when she was many, many years ago, a law school student of my husband. And I remember he came home from teaching class one day and he said, there is an extraordinary woman in my class and she's going to do great things. Oh, sorry. And she did. And she is. So what I wanted to do today with this conversation was to be an extension of the frustration that I feel, and I think so many of us feel, about not being able to make changes to systems that are really broken. What do you do if you're just an individual, like Emily is just an individual, without the ability to influence the Supreme Court or the presidency or any of these other things? What do we do about issues we care about? And what are the issues we care about? And one of the things that I've been focusing on a lot in the last sort of 12 years of my life is the social justice challenges we face of a disproportionate number of people of color who are imprisoned, and the obvious disconnection of a huge portion of society because they don't feel that they're represented fairly. And so who better to speak about that than somebody who's made it her life's work to make change one person at a time. So Emily's going to take you through some of the stories of her clients and of her work. And we hope this will be, a supportive dialogue. Everyone comes into their views about social justice with different personal experiences of friends. And this should be a chance to learn and to share, and just the beginning of what we hope will be many conversations about how to lift up people who don't have communities like the community that we have to make them feel not alone. Emily.
And thank you so much for that. I actually didn't know that story. So that was really, really nice. Really, really happy to be speaking with you all tonight. And Anne said this thing just now, who better to talk about this? And immediately where my head went was, well, my clients are actually better to talk about to talk about this, because of course, when we're talking about massive, toxic, oppressive, racist systems, the people who are most impacted by those systems are the people best qualified to actually speak about those systems. So I'm actually not the best person. But when we're in the criminal justice world, or the criminal legal world, as I like to call it, because you don't find a lot of justice in it, oftentimes the people who are closest to the problem and who are experiencing the worst harms of this system can't talk for a lot of reasons. The song we danced into is a song by this young man, Draco, who's, as you can tell, phenomenally talented, very successful up-and-coming rapper in Los Angeles, who's been silenced for the last 2 years by a truly ludicrous prosecution accusing him of being responsible for other people's crimes because of his rap lyrics. And that was a song that he recorded entirely over jail phones after doing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of days in solitary confinement. So when I think about who is actually best to speak on this, he's now under a gag order, by the way, in response to his exercise of his First Amendment rights to record that album. He and his lawyer are now under gag orders from the court. And so many of my clients can't talk because they have their life on the line, or their livelihood on the line, or their kids on the line. So I am here to talk about what I have seen and what I've tried to do about it, with a full acknowledgement that I'm just hoping to offer sort of a bridge to those who are more qualified. And I'd like to start by talking about a woman who's a friend, a former client, whose case to me really pulled together a lot of what's wrong with the structures that govern people's lives. So this young woman, we're going to call her Lisa for her privacy. It was 4 a.m. She's asleep in bed, in the bed she shares with her then partner and her 4-year-old daughter. There's a banging at the door. She jumps out of bed. She's terrified. It's the middle of the night. She lives in the Bronx. And her door comes crashing down off the hinges. Dozens of armed men yelling pour into her apartment. They throw her on the ground. They throw her child on the ground. She can't reach her child's hand because her child has been thrown on the ground far from where she is. And she's just here screaming and lights. And she's terrified and she's crying and she's begging for her child. And what she's experiencing is a search warrant, narcotics squad search warrant. The police toss her home and they find drugs in the closet. She had no idea. She had no idea that her partner, who she'd been dating for some time, was selling drugs and had stashed them in a closet in the apartment where she never looked. She had no idea. It was easy for him to hide. But because it was her apartment, because her name was on the lease, she was arrested on a felony drug distribution charge. And when I met her, she was crying in a very small jail cell. It was my job to get her home. So she was completely innocent. She was a preschool teacher. She actually had just rented this apartment, and her number one concern was getting home to her child, because when you are arrested and you are a woman of color and you're living in the Bronx, the first thing that they do is they open a child services investigation to try to see if there's any reason why they should separate her from her child. So her choice in a partner, her unwitting choice, I mean, everybody's had a bad boyfriend. Everybody's had a partner hide something from them. This was going to be suddenly impugn her character as a mother, and she was risking losing her child. So all she wanted to do was get home. But the prosecutor in the case was holding on to her house keys. She could not physically enter her apartment because the prosecutor was saying that the house keys were the key evidence tying her to the drug den where the drugs were found. And so even if we could get her out that night, she was trying to figure out like how she would physically put a roof over her head. If she couldn't get home that night, if she couldn't sort things out, she'd already missed a shift at work. She was really scared she was going to lose her job. And of course, if she ended up unhoused and jobless, her chances of being able to stay with her child were even lower. This to me is the perfect encapsulation of how, when you're living in a vulnerable situation in America, when you're living in poverty, or when you are in another state of vulnerability or powerlessness, it's like living on this big net. You are trying to balance. It is difficult to move across the net. It sways under you. Your foot could fall through, and one cut and the whole thing comes unraveled and you go falling down. And for her, that one cut was this arrest. And for so many people, for the dad arrested on, one too many suspended license charges, who gets his car seized and isn't going to be able to use his car to go to work or drive his mom to her medical appointments. For the kid who punches his stepdad and gets expelled from school because of it. I've represented thousands and thousands of people, and almost all of them were problems of this kind, where the one arrest was going to just cause an explosion of life fallout that would make it impossible for anyone to move forward and succeed in their life. I couldn't do it. You couldn't do it. Like, nobody could do it if you were dealing with these kinds of challenges. Now, in Lisa's case, we were very lucky because she was an amazing human. The win in her case was due not at all to me, entirely due to her, because it was a felony. So they had to indict her case. They presented her case to the grand jury, and she and I sat together and we decided, you know what? There are going to be some women in that room who have had bad boyfriends. There are going to be some women in that grand jury room who know what we're talking about when we go in there and tell them what happened. So Lisa went into the grand jury very bravely. It's really scary to testify in the grand jury. Your lawyer isn't allowed to say anything. You're all on your own. And she told the grand jury what happened. And she explained that the drugs weren't hers and that she teaches preschool and she didn't know anything about it. And she just wants to get home to her kid. And they dismissed the charges. And I'm really happy to say that she and I are friends to this day, and she's headed to law school. So that to me is an example of when you can avoid the catastrophe, the phenomenal success and potential you can foster. Right? Like, if you do this work well, if you are protecting, if you're a defender, and I take that word to mean like, not just defending a criminal defense case, but like defending someone on all fronts against all threats to their happiness and future, you're not defending just the status quo, you're defending a person's entire potential and a community's entire potential and the economic mobility of like entire regions of our country. So after practicing as a public defender for nearly a decade and seeing case after case after case like this, where like one piece could be everything, I started to realize that public defenders aren't really equipped to defend the whole person. They have too many cases, and they are trained to defend the criminal case. If they are lucky, can work with social workers. I see a really great comment in the chat about generational trauma and the trauma of going through this that absolutely impacts people. When a public defender is well-resourced and they're working with a social worker who can sit with that situation and begin, certainly not do the whole job, but begin to mitigate some of the harm, that's great. But by and large, across this country, the people who are second closest to the problem and who are most empowered to change it, right? Who are not putting their own lives on the line, they are next to the people whose lives are on the line, and they have the information that they need to try to make a change. They don't have the resources to do so. Public defender, any given public defender accesses about 20% of the low-income population in their region. And that 20% chunk that public defenders access tends to be the people who are most at risk of extreme harm, who have been arrested, who are at risk of being arrested, who have a criminal record and therefore may struggle to find work or education, who are vulnerable in some way. All of these sort of ingredients that go into a person being arrested beyond just the hyper racist nature of the way policing works in America, but other ingredients. Poverty makes you more likely to be arrested, homelessness, any form of substance use or behavioral health problems. So all of these vulnerabilities are the clientele that we're talking about. So making things work for that 20% actually influences a lot more of that community than just picking 20% of people at random. You're accessing the folks who are most vulnerable and who have the most potential to transform the trajectory of their space. So I started to think, like, public defenders should really be able to do more. We should be able to work on housing. We should be able to work on education. I was working at Bronx Defenders at the time, which is a holistic defender agency where I was empowered to work with other disciplines of lawyers and do more. And I thought, policy change is really slow. Like, across the country, we're seeing all of this great sort of criminal justice reform conversation happen. It's really exciting. But like, Lisa needed someone to find her a place to stay that night when she didn't have keys. Lisa needed a family defense lawyer that night. Policy change doesn't help Lisa. Policy change doesn't help the guy whose car has been seized by the police. Human to human help, though, is really fast and really flexible and really effective. And I thought, public defenders across the country should have access to humans who are trained to deal with the little stuff. The little stuff public defenders don't have bandwidth for. When I say little stuff, it may be little, it may be one benefits application, but that benefits application is food and healthcare for an entire family. That's not lawyer work, though. And so I thought, when I was first out of college, I had a series of really crappy jobs. And it would have been really great to have a job where I could have impacted change in a meaningful way. And this would be a really amazing job, especially if we put this together as a program where young people who were themselves from the low-income community or who were themselves system impacted could use this program to gain incredible work experience and then have doors open for them to law schools or journalism schools or social work schools or other programs that they might not otherwise have had the red carpet rolled out towards. So I went to my dear friend from first grade who had become a nonprofit management consultant with a background in data and evaluation, who knows how to do all sorts of things that I don't know how to do. And I said, hey, I had this idea. What if we got brilliant young people and we trained them to do all of this non-lawyer work, housing work, benefits work, employment, education. We just basically trained them to be really great problem solvers across all of these different areas that are most likely to undermine the success of the people I work for. And we distribute them across the country to public defenders who would never otherwise be able to do this. And we start impacting the system this way. And she said, I'm in. She'd had like 3 mimosas. It was brunch. She just dove in like right away. It was awesome. And she brought this whole skill set that I don't have, which is building a company, how to, set us up as a 501c3, how we began, I was doing most of our fundraising, but she was doing most of our sort of organizational structure. And we put together a little pilot. We were going around all these funders saying, we know this will work. I've been a public defender for 10 years. I've seen the magic that can happen when you defend a person on all fronts. And they were saying, like, that's great, but like, can you show us results from a place? And we're like, no, this doesn't really exist. We're going to do it for the first time. You should totally trust us that this works. And they didn't, but a few really amazing Individuals gave us the funding to get started. We piloted the program in California and Delaware. We wanted to prove that it could work in really different places. And we found some phenomenal young people and we trained them. We got all the we tapped all our friends, right? We brought in trainers from around the country to teach them how to do all the interventions that you might need to do over the life of a criminal case and beyond, and reentry work and like the whole shebang in housing, education, family defense, vital document gathering, benefits, property retrieval, civil rights, and health. So, no, it just was not ambitious at all. But they were brilliant and they figured it out. They're great problem solvers. Mostly we hired them to be stubborn and tenacious and persuasive. The program, as you might imagine, I felt like it was succeeding. These young people were embedded with the public defenders. They were trained to ask the questions that public defenders usually avoid. Because after all, no lawyer wants to ask the question that leads to an answer that is a problem they can't help with, right? Like if I don't know how to do eviction work, I don't want to ask my client, hey, are you getting evicted? And have them be like, yes, can you please help me stay in my apartment? I'd be like, I don't know how to do that. So the advocates were trained to ask the questions. They trained the lawyers how to have these conversations that really got to the heart of what people were struggling with. They were trained to problem solve the problem themselves, do the direct service they could, go find an organization or a pro bono partner or somebody and convince them to help if they couldn't do it themselves. And I knew we were going to succeed when about 4 weeks in, there was a gentleman who'd been arrested in Delaware. And he said, hey, I heard you have these advocates. Can I have an advocate on my case? I really want a little extra help. So that, to me, that was the buy-in that I was looking for. We grew. We got interest from public defenders across the country. We opened an office in Texas. We have now graduated our first class and we made sure they all got into the law schools of their dreams, which was an amazing achievement. And we're now serving 5 cities. We've brought in our second class, which is our most diverse and actually most system impacted class ever. And they're working in areas that have never seen this kind of work before, where this has never been possible for public defenders or clients or anyone in the system. And we're seeing some really amazing impacts, right? Because obviously we're doing our job right, we're impacting the clients. We're helping the client and their family. We're helping people walk away from the system and be free and also succeed. It's not enough to be free. You want to foster success and give people the resources they need to live their life the way they want to. But we're also seeing an impact on the public defenders we work with, who were so resource starved for so long, they just like couldn't engage emotionally. But now being able to say, hey, I have a person who can help you with that. They've started thinking holistically, thinking about the whole person and weaving that into the way they defend cases. And we found that we're actually getting people out of jail at a much higher rate than folks who don't have an advocate on their case. Weaving in all of this extra information about a person's life changes the way a very dehumanizing system sees the person. When I started practicing in the Bronx, one of the things that shocked me the most was in arraignments in the court, the guards call your client a body. They say, we're going to bring the bodies up now. We got 27 bodies in the holding. And it's like, I couldn't get used to it. But to me, that's the perfect encapsulation of what system actors need to do to put people in cages. Like, they are also humans. And in order for them to do their job, they have to treat people like bodies. But when you don't rely just on policy, but bring an actual human partner into court with a person and you say, hey, this person's name is Lisa and she has a 4-year-old daughter and she's an amazing mom and she's also a really dedicated preschool teacher and she just started a new job and they love her at this new job. And if you hold her in right now, she's going to lose everything she's worked for and everything she's built. She, a woman who has never been arrested before, and she's also the primary caregiver to her mother who has diabetes. And here's all the things that Lisa's doing for her mom. You destroy the ability of the court to treat your client like a body. When you bring people's humanity into that space, you're not just impacting the client and the advocate who's gaining these amazing skills and experience, and the public defender who's doing better work. You're impacting the judges and the prosecutors and everybody else in that space who's been dehumanizing people and treating that courtroom like a factory for so long. So we started to see systems becoming more human. Judges loved our work. Even prosecutors loved our work. I guess it's given me hope after so many years in the system that I thought was just I mean, look, I still think the system is hopelessly toxic and racist and needs to be dismantled and rebuilt. I'll be honest about that. But I can't do that by myself right now. What I can do by myself right now is bring these amazing young people into this space and empower them and give them the tools to meet clients where they are and work for them. Don't work on them, work for them. Figure out what they need, support them, respect their choices, follow their lead, let them set the goals. It's been incredibly validating, even as crises unfold. You know, COVID hit and it was so scary. And we knew that these jails and prisons were going to become, I mean, as if they could become worse. They were going to become, everybody who was in was going to get a possible death sentence. But our team was already doing the medical document gathering and the advocacy work needed to get people out. We were able to get, you know, in Alameda County, several thousand people out right away because we were already trained to do the problem solving and to partner with people. When the police uprising happened across the country, we were already trained to help people understand their rights and know how to file civilian complaints against police and document abuses and how to funnel that to a civil rights lawyer. So we invested in this idea that humans are better, faster, and more flexible than policy change. And while we wait for policy change and we wait for the system to be dismantled or restructured or whatever's going to happen to it, while we wait, the fastest, most effective thing we can do is put brilliant young people into that crucible. And they can, I truly believe they can do anything. And we've given them a lot of support because it's really hard on them. And I'm happy to talk about all the things we've had to do to support them as well. But before I turn this over to questions, I just wanted to say, you know, what's next for us is really exciting. We're watching this next generation of leaders come out of our program. I see perhaps the next Kamala Harris being someone who came from a defense side background instead of a prosecutorial background. I see the next generation of leaders in this country coming out of a space where they've learned to work for people, not on people. And we're growing, you know, in an economic crisis, I'm fundraising my little tush off and I'm trying to build the ability to spread this program to Los Angeles, to New Jersey, to Pennsylvania. Looks like we may open an office for some tribal defenders in Montana. So that's my spiel. And now I can look at some questions.
Emily, tell us all of the cities where you're currently active.
Yeah, we're in Oakland, California, Wilmington, Delaware, Houston, Texas, New Orleans, Louisiana, and Baton Rouge, Louisiana. We've got about 24 advocates right now across the country. Our pilot class was 10. We've more than doubled in size. And this is just, I mean, we're only in year 3. We are, I'm just looking at these questions. It's hard to keep track of the chat. Yeah, there's about 24 young people in our program right now. And our hope is to grow within 5 years to around 320 young people. I keep saying young people, I mean early stage career people. Because if somebody graduates from college at the age of 45, like they're in my, that's my crew. It's just early, at a stage in their career when we can help impact their trajectory. We're hoping to scale up to about 320 people so that we could impact roughly 10% of arrested people nationwide.
And so you have a lot of people who apply to your program. Who do you choose and why? What do you look for in them?
Yeah, it's a really competitive program. It is. I'm actually proud to say we're harder to get into than Harvard Law School because there are so many amazing people out there who want to do phenomenal work of this kind. And I'm really proud of that. I'm proud that the desire is there, that people aren't like, I don't want to go be a consultant. No offense to consultants. My partner was a consultant, but you know, people say, I want to go into a jail and I want to work there all night, helping people get home. I think that's really cool. So the backgrounds we look for, we emphasize local hiring. So if somebody is from the community we're going to serve, they have a leg up. We also interpret from the community more broadly, right? So if a person comes from a low income background or has been system impacted, that's absolutely a characteristic that is advantaged in our hiring process. We look for diversity in all forms. We look for diversity of life experience as well. Right now, our class is 60% young people of color, 25% system impacted, and 40% from low income backgrounds. But we also look for more than that. We look for creativity, tenacity, real emotional toughness. I think it was like emotional durability. You got to be able to take a beating and get back up. persuasive communicators, people who will sit outside the DMV all day, not go away, and then talk a really overburdened clerk into giving them a break. Like that's the key personality type.
And what's the ladder? You talked about last year's class got into, was it all of them went to law school? The law schools?
Oh, no, only about half. So we have folks interested in social work and journalism and community organizing. One of them says he's going to be an anarchist. I don't know what that career ladder is. I am trying to help find him mentors. So if anybody knows a really cool anarchist who wants to be a mentor to another young anarchist, please call me. But basically, it's our job to find them early. We meet with every advocate one-on-one every other week. So during that time, we talk about their sort of emotional weather report, how they're handling the work. We talk about their cases, we can troubleshoot, come up with new ideas, but we also do a professional development check-in where we find them professional mentors, folks who can have a cup of coffee with them and say, hey, here's how I got from A to B. And they've expressed a really, we've got one young person who wants to meet Danielle Surratt and talk about really cool alternative theories of violence intervention. We've got one person who wants to become an investigative journalist, and I connected him with a friend who's doing that. So it's really varied. One girl wants to work at the post office because she's emotionally exhausted. And I was like, I'm not sure the post office in 2020 is the most relaxing place.
No, it's probably not a relaxing place. We could suggest maybe a yoga retreat or something. But we all probably want to work in a relaxing place at the moment, and yet there's important work to do. Yeah. You said you want to eventually get up to being able to intervene in 10% of the cases, which is 350 people. But you're going to achieve that. So what's the even bigger picture, and how can we have 60 women or so on this call right now who care and want to be supportive, and I know you're fundraising. What are other ways that we can help speed the change, both in what you're doing and on other levels?
There's several things. So the long-term goal is to make ourselves obsolete. Like long-term, if we created a program the size of Teach for America or bigger, where we had advocates in every public defender's office across the country, and we were able to meet all client needs. Basically, any client who needed a partner to navigate a really difficult life situation, we could give them someone. First of all, I'm convinced that we would see much, much better, I hate the word recidivism, but we would see better outcomes in the community long-term. When you help somebody retain their employment license or retain their apartment or make it through a substance abuse treatment program successfully, you're setting that person up for more success down the line. So I'm convinced we would see a positive public safety and economic mobility outcome. We were planning to study that this year in a very rigorous way. COVID makes results a little wonky, so we're not studying it right now, but that's the idea. I also think that the work we're doing to humanize folks and to sort of present mitigation results in significantly lower incarceration rates. So the more we do, the better people do in the community, and the less often they are put in cages. So the less often you really need the kind of life or death public defense that we often see. The less overburdened public defenders can become, the better they can do their job, the better response they get from a system that sees people as more human. So I would love to see a world in which our presence was transforming outcomes into outcomes that were supportive and humanizing and transformative for everyone, not just for people who were of privilege.
So obviously, you answered part of this question when you said COVID made some of the follow-ups hard, but you talked about your now friendship with Lisa after you helped her through that horrible time. How many of your folks maintain contact and relationships with some of the people they're working for after the cases moved on?
It's funny because it's not hard to get the advocates to take on these cases. It is really, really hard to teach the advocates when to close a case. And you can't stay friends with all of your clients forever because you're going to have hundreds of clients. But there are relationships that form that are really special, and that's great. I think it's different for each advocate. The anarchist I referred to recently cannot let go of cases and never closes cases, and will never say goodbye to his clients, and probably needs to be stopped from showing up at their house when they miss a meeting. So we gotta most of our advocates are like 23 years old and really driven. So, kind of dial them back sometimes. But it's pretty common to stay involved after the criminal case is over, because so much of the work we do isn't over. I mean, the housing case may still be open. The benefits application may still be pending. The substance use treatment program is ongoing. So we stay involved pretty long-term, pretty frequently.
And the folks in your program are paid, correct?
Yes. The average salary is around $40,000 a year, which needs to be higher in certain regions. It's a little higher in California. I'm constantly pushing for it to be higher because although in our pilot, I was able to fundraise all the money for all the advocate salaries, that's not a scalable model. And also, like, it's really good for the public defender to have an investment in this team and for them to be employees of the public defender, so they are part of the same employment ecosystem as everybody they're working with. So basically what we provide to the public defender for free is amazing recruiting, really intensive training at the outset, and then ongoing weekly or bi-weekly trainings thereafter. Personal coaching for every advocate, technical assistance to the offices to teach them how to train their attorneys on how to do this kind of work, to teach the leadership how to implement it. And we do all of that for free for 2 years. The public defender pays the salary and benefits of each advocate that they have.
That is a more sustainable model. One of the things that struck me when you were saying you ask each of them what their personal weather report is that you now have 30 some kids, all of whom have different weather reports. And in this current climate, there's probably a lot of bad weather. How do you deal with that, as the leader and just knowing what you know about the system?
So it's been interesting. We recently scaled up. We hired 2 regional directors, and we now actually have a total of 3 regional directors who are now on our national team, but dedicated to coaching a smaller number of advocates, because I by myself am not good enough to coach everybody well. But I think the thing for me that's been the most important, we're working on affinity groups, support networks, mentoring for the advocates, like all of this in response to the fact that my experience as a white woman doing public defense it doesn't really translate to the experience of like a young Black woman doing advocate work in a world where she's inside the jail all the time and seeing people who look like her being harmed. And my experience can't speak to that and cannot adequately support, her needs as a human in this very, very traumatic circumstance. So we've got a lot of social work friends. We do a lot of trainings on this. We have sort of mentorship set up amongst graduated advocates and the current team. We're thinking about other forms though of like mental health support. We're looking at like apps and programs. I mean, like honestly, if I could have like a therapist on call for all of the advocates, I'd be thrilled, but we can't afford that. So we're looking for ways to approximate that level of support.
Yeah, that makes sense. And, I guess as the system, because policy change, as you said at the beginning, why you started this, takes so long, this really is a long game play, and that's unfortunate. But it sounds like the changes that you're making for individuals are very apparent to them even from the early moments, and having someone see them not as a body but as a human, and I find that really shocking. Although, if you think about it, HR tends to call their employees headcount, which is probably not a lot different than being a body. I mean, a lot of our systems sort of dehumanize this one in the worst of all possible ways. Are you linked to other programs so that once somebody gets out of the core system and gets some of their advocacy work done, are there other partner organizations that you can kind of create a web with?
Yeah, so that's a huge part of our work, and that's actually the regional directors that we've just brought on. That's going to be a huge part of what their project will be. Essentially, we're trying to create for the client the feeling of a one-stop shop. Because if you're on that poverty web, right, you are devoting so much time and energy to survival, to linking together what you need to make it through the next week, that when the system asks you, oh, could you please, meet with the court on this date and then meet with this probation officer, and then we have a mental health treatment program that you need to go to 3 times a week, and we need you to go to Narcotics Anonymous twice, and we're also gonna, you're also getting evicted. That's like 7 different agencies that you're being expected to somehow like, no, I would have a hard time managing that. And I'm not struggling with all of these challenges. So part of what we're trying to create is the feeling of a one-stop shop for folks who we work with. So they only need to remember their advocate's phone number. If they can remember the advocate's phone number, the advocate can manage all these other players. And that means liaising with a ton of outside organizations. This works best when we have warm relationships with them so that we can say, oh, you need a housing lawyer. I know exactly the place. I'm going to call over to Civil Legal Services of Delaware, and my friend Dan is going to be your lawyer, and I can walk you over there right now to his office in non-COVID times. So having relationships like that create, even though we're not creating the Cadillac holistic defense model inside one office under one roof, for the client, it feels like they just have one person who gives them all of these assets. That also is helpful for us because we don't have to duplicate stuff that's working in the community. If there's somebody in the community who's doing like brilliant education rights work, we don't have to learn how to appear in suspension hearings. We just have to have the kind of relationship with them where we take each other's clients. And that's a huge amount of sort of groundwork that we lay when we go to a new jurisdiction, is meeting with everybody who's already in the ecosystem and figuring out what they need and how we can help support what they're doing and how we can make it feasible for them to take cases.
Yeah, one of our members just asked about possible partnerships with like EAP, employee assistance programs, and other ways to get mental health support to your folks.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
And
she offers to connect. She's offering to connect you with someone. Yeah. But I think that's a terrific idea. One of the things that you've talked about in the past is Accompliceship. Can you talk about what that is and how it's different than allyship?
Yeah, I can't take credit for this idea. My good friend Jeff Kagan Trenchard, who's an immigration lawyer and a professional speaker on trauma and trauma-informed interviewing, talks about this because allyship is, to Jeff, passive. To be in an alliance is not an active act, right? It's like there's like a thoughts and prayers feel to it. But when Jeff talks about accompliceship, implicit in the word accompliceship is putting yourself in danger with another person, doing an activity with another person, taking on a challenge. Generally, you hear it in the context of a crime, but that's not what we're talking about. I'm not actually committing any crimes with my clients yet. It basically is a word that conveys that you're willing to lay down in traffic and put yourself on the line in service of the safety of the people that you're trying to be for. I think that's really important. I think a lot about, I had a friend who was active in a lot of these policing uprisings in Portland, in a really dangerous city, talked to me about, obviously there's a lot of tension around race and violence, and a lot of folks who were white doing things that put Black activists in danger. And when I think of accompliceship, I think of those white activists who organized to put their bodies between police and Black people who were marching in the streets. And I think that's kind of like the physical metaphor of what our work should be doing. Like, we should be putting ourselves on the line to make the voices of the people we serve heard and also impactful. Like, not just heard, but acted upon, responded to. So I like to call myself an accomplice. In my context, it's very problematic and I don't care at all. I will explain it happily.
Well, you're clearly acting in that way. I didn't know you when you were a little girl. I sort of knew you when you got to law school, but was there a moment in your personal growth and education where you all of a sudden said, yes, this is what I need to do for the world and for my life? What happened?
It was when you knew me. When I was a little girl, I wanted to be either a jockey or an actress. So, and then I got too tall to be a jockey. And I cried all day. I was like 11 and I was too big to be a jockey, and it was just the most devastating thing. But when I went to, this is going to seem like I'm just saying this, but this is the truth. I went to law school because my then fiance was applying to law school and I wanted to be able to follow him. And then he cheated on me in a really dramatic way and we broke up. And I had been accepted to some really good law schools. And I thought, well, that's never going to happen again. That's clearly a fluke. And I deferred for a year. I was working on a book of poems. And when the book came out, I had no other, I was like driving around Los Angeles crying a lot and having small car accidents. And I thought, well, I'll go for a semester and I will see what it's like. And I packed my cat up in the car and we drove up to Palo Alto, and I wound up in this, first of all, I wound up with like all these kids who'd like to read books on how to go to law school. I had not met a lawyer. It's really I was like an English major, like really great talking about, Yeats. And I had no idea what I was doing in law school. But there was this one class where I actually really connected with the cases and I could remember every fact of every case. And that was a certain David Mills's criminal law class. And I thought, these are stories that I feel. And I feel like I'd had a rough time of it as a young person. And I felt like I could really relate to the stories everybody in the stories, survivor, perpetrator, all like I felt all of it. And I got a job at the LA County Public Defender's Office. And this is a story that I wrote about in an article recently on gang prosecutions, but I second sat a murder trial for an innocent man, very clearly innocent. He was convicted based purely on foul play by prosecutors and racism and fear of gangs on the part of the jury. And I think that's what that was my crucible. That was one of those, like my baptism by fire, right? The horror of seeing what systems really do. Like the Dick Wolf drama in real life is like actually a terrible oppression machine. And I worked for the next 12 years to get that friend of mine out, Frank. He's now out and doing well. But I never turned away from public defense. I thought this is where this is the problem I can work on. I can't fix the climate. I can't fix major diseases, but like I can get people out of cages at a really good rate of speed.
I want to, we have time for a few more questions, but I want to talk for a minute about fear. You do not seem like a fearful person. I don't know whether you are or not, but at least you portray yourself as being very brave. And, you've talked a lot as the fear of the people that you represent and what it's like being stuck in a system unfairly, or that you don't understand at all and you don't have experience and resources. And we've talked about the fear of people, like when you led in today with the Draco song, the fear of prosecutors and those in the system about what it could mean to be a rapper, and therefore they're terrified of this person and assume he's a bad person and assume he's. Talk to me about fear.
I think fear is about difference for a lot of people. I tell I have an almost 3-year-old, and I tell her a lot that being brave isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what you have to do anyway, even though it's scary. I'm scared a lot. I was scared every time I stood next to somebody who might get sent to Rikers Island, and it was my job to prevent that from happening.
So it was fear of failing? Not fear for your physical well-being, but fear of.
Oh God, I'm never afraid for. I'm stupid about my physical well-being. Like I've slept in my car in South Central Los Angeles. Like I'm not. I'm really dumb about physical fear. I used to do rodeo. Like I'm really good at falling off of animals. Like, but no fear of what might happen to this person. Like when you go to a person and you say, "It is my job to help you," you sure as hell better not let them down. And when you are a defender, it is your job always to help. Even if all you can do is make sure that they are heard and make sure that the people who do them harm have to do so knowing the full extent of the harm they're doing. But yeah, it was fear of knowing that person was in Rikers. I mean, it was fear of that person being in Rikers.
Fear for that person.
Yeah, and for their family and for their mom who had it's fear for, the moment of the mom learning that her child is now in Rikers. I mean, that's what scares me. I think when I think about the fear about it, I mean, Frank, the guy I just mentioned, Frank's 5'2". He was in a gang because he grew up in a neighborhood where everybody is designated as being in a gang. He had never done anyone any harm. He was just like a nice kid who liked to party. He joyrode a vehicle one time. And the jury who looked at him was so scared of him because the prosecutor said he was a gang member and he was Black, that they didn't hear any other evidence. They were just like, this person is different and I don't understand them. They must be dangerous. And a lot of that is racism in our system and our country's history, like our country's, a country whose inception comes out of a slave system. Like there's so much in it, but at the end of the day, almost no one's fear can sustain contact with difference, right? Like even the most virulent bigots have that like special person who's the exception to their bigoted rule and they're not afraid. It's just like, I feel like familiarity breeds healthier relationships. I don't think that fixes anything, but I do think it diminishes fear.
Yeah. A lot of the women on this call are trying to figure out, and we talk about using your personal strengths to make progress in whatever you care about. How does your early life wanting to be, and being to some extent, an actor help you with what you do now?
Well, I should give credit where credit is due. I had a mom who would not countenance the idea of anything not being possible. To her, I grew up with this really wild idea that really, truly anything is possible if you are just creative enough.
I got that from my mom too.
Yeah, yeah, you can jerry rig anything.
Yeah.
Performance, the ability to perform in front of people, is just a useful skill no matter what you do. I am not actually a good actor. I would like to be very clear. I wanted very much to be an actor. I am slightly wooden and I can't cry on cue. So, but being comfortable embarrassing yourself in front of strangers is an invaluable life skill. That is one thing that is so great to get rid of fear. Like my first jury trial, I stood up in front of the jury. I'd never asked a jury questions before. I was very nervous. And I walked over to the jury to begin voir dire. And I tripped over the projector cord and I fell into the jury box, like literally onto a juror's lap. It was the worst possible. But like at that point, like I'd done plays where I was like, I did the Elephant Man. I was naked in front of strangers. I'd had to sing, which I'm bad at. Like I've had to do all sorts of things in theater. So falling to the jury box is just like, great. We kicked off with some improv comedy. That's awesome. The next year, I guess, spilled an entire pitcher of water all over the table. It's just like, it's really, I win though. So I guess when I do something disastrous at the beginning, I win. So it's all a good sign. But yeah, if you can take an improv class and become immune to embarrassing yourself in front of strangers, it's like a superpower.
Well, we'll try to have some sort of improv session as a future Parlay House event for everybody. I think that's a really fun topic. We probably have time for one more question. Does anyone have one? And if the group doesn't, I'm going to throw it to Ariel, who will, I'm sure, ask a final question. Anybody want to throw something in the chat? Yes, Melody has a question. Ariel, can you find her and unmute her?
Yes, I can. Let me see. Give me 1 second.
I've done a really bad job keeping up with the chat.
So we're supposed to. We told you didn't have to.
Okay, good.
Melody, I'm finding you. Okay, I'm going to ask to unmute. So you have to accept because I don't have that power. I just asked.
Unmute. I'm unmuted. Wonderful. Hi, I'm Dr. Melody Hayes. I am a long student in social justice and health justice issues. We're in a very special moment of really taking seriously the systematic racism that has been a part of being American. And I love the work you're doing, and I just want to ask you, what is the most upstream thing that you think that we can do so there's not another generation of courageous people doing your work, not another generation of Just Mercy movies being made, or this is how they see us? What is your most upstream solution? Because you're in the system so downstream, you know, what's your most upstream suggestion for us for how we can make you less necessary for the next generation?
Yeah. I mean, what's really, really hard is that like the upstream is also the downstream, right? Because I see kids who grew up with their parents incarcerated, which completely like changes their trajectory. But I mean, to me, treating all mamas like they are highly valuable. I mean, the criminal legal system does to Black men what the family legal system does to Black women. And that our medical system too. And treating mamas like they are, and you know, parents, I should say parents or like the grown-ups who are raising a child, like they are our society's most important like resource toward crafting a generation that will do less harm and that will be less harmed. I mean, like if we had perfect early childhood support and every kid had enough food and really great places to be and stimulation and like no lead poisoning, like these are really basic requests, right? Like clean water, 3 square meals a day, and stuff to read. Like, I think that would make a massive, massive difference. When I think about upstream, I think a lot about gang policing and gang neighborhoods and the way that gang police officers treat children. Because by the time you're like 7 years old in a neighborhood, you're being approached daily by police officers who know your name and want to talk to you about your friends. And by the time someone gets to me when they're 15, they've had hundreds, if not thousands of contacts where they were treated like an adult criminal, even though they were a 7-year-old boy. Like if we don't think we're building, like any crime we have, we're building it ourselves. Like nobody goes out there in the world and is like, you know what I'd really like to do? Lead a life of crime and end up in prison. Like nobody makes that rational decision. People want to succeed. They want to have companionship. They want to have a social circle. They want to contribute to their community. And sometimes they have to get those things from bad places because those things aren't available anywhere else. So that would be my answer to your question.
It's a great answer. And I think it's, you know, at least taking care of the mamas is something that resonates with a lot of people on this call today. So inspiring. I'm not surprised because I've known you for a long time, but you know, I think that the light that you shed into not only the problems, which are so heavy, but the opportunity and the fact that we can take these new college grads who care, who are already motivated to do well in the world and give them the tools and support that they need to help advocate for change on behalf of others is very much in keeping with the Parlay House motto and what we're about. And it's terrific. So I'm so thrilled that you joined us and so moved by you as always. And for all of you, Emily is doing double Mills duty tonight. She's leaving this and hopping on another Zoom with my husband to help teach his criminal law class at Stanford because, you know, she doesn't like to sleep at all.
Well, but before I go, and this is such an amazing space you've built. Like I'm watching all of these women supporting each other and giving each other ideas and asking these amazing questions. And like the power in this space is so phenomenal and also so unique that I'm incredibly grateful for you and for this and for all of you who are here.
So we're going to put in the chat all of the ways for everybody to reach you. I know Emily would love the EAP lead, would love to know, would love any financial support, would love to know great people in your communities she can connect with. She's still kind of, year 3 is still like Series A in the whole startup world. So she's got so many great ways that you can help her. And I think even just the support from everybody here is a little bit of a boost on a day that you feel like your weather forecast is not so good. Remember today, a lot of us here cheering for you, and we're so grateful that you took an hour to tell us about this journey. So we'll loop back and tell everyone how you're doing. And
cool.
Thank you.
Tell the person who knows the anarchist, like really, or if anybody else wants a mentor and advocate.
Yes.
I think that was Melody as well.
I think that was Melody too.
So that's even though Melody and I are not going to be best friends forever. It's going to be great.
For sure. All right. Well, as we always do, let's dance out together. Going for some uplifting music on the way out, and we'll have more great stories of your success to tell in the future. Thanks, Emily.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Thanks, community.